Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I'll be discussing my thoughts on Season 2, Episode 2 of Star Trek Discovery, entitled New Eden. And I found this to be a really compelling, engrossing episode from right out of the gate that actually heavily reminded me of certain touchstones in the history of Star Trek. If you go back to the original series, there were episodes such as The Return of the Archons and For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky that I felt were very reminiscent to what was going on in this episode, as well as a Star Trek Enterprise episode from Season 1 of Enterprise, which just happens to be my second all-time favorite Star Trek series, just after TOS, called Terra Nova. Each of the three of these particular episodes had certain plot elements that I found very reminiscent to what was going on in this Star Trek Discovery episode. If you go back to the Archons episode from TOS, it was very much dealing with the Kirk, Spock, McCoy Enterprise stumbling onto a colony on a planet that was very backward technologically, sort of 18th, 19th century, and things were running amok, and it was a whole mystery to sort of solve what was going on there, religious beliefs and things, playing a part in it. For the World is Hollow was very much about a sort of asteroid or meteor that was just sort of floating along in space, but just happened to be on a collision course with a planet or a sun or something like that. But lo and behold, within this thing, it was an artificial structure that actually contained within it a whole humanoid alien culture, a species that didn't even know they were not on a planet. And it was very much the qualm of the day to be figured out for Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and things like that, how to redirect the course of this thing to stave off destruction and the loss of all these lives that were contained within this edifice. And you had Tilly becoming a very integral role in trying to figure out how to stave off the rings surrounding this new Eden planet from impacting it and wiping all the human settlement out, and using the gravitational forces of the asteroid they had just taken in to the cargo hold in Episode 1 of Season 2. Going back to the Enterprise episode, Terra Nova, it was very much dealing with a former human colony that had gone out exploring space in the early days of spacefaring, and all communication with them had been lost like a century beforehand. So there was this very interesting mystery of going and investigating and trying to find out what happened to the people, the colony that had landed there, and very much akin to this episode of Discovery where you had certain elements to do with the distress signal and things of that sort. It sort of called back to wartime, and the colonists on the planet had thought that, the humans back on Earth had wanted to go to war with them, and it was a whole really, minced situation. Where unfortunately the human beings that were there, that were the survivors, the ancestors, had become very devolved because, for all intents and purposes, all the parents had died off due to radiation poisoning, which was what was actually happening. It wasn't bombardment from another human faction. And so they sort of devolved as they evolved, as they grew older. So a lot of these elements were really playing on my mind as I was watching this episode, even amidst the twists and turns and things that I didn't necessarily expect that were coming. I do have to say, as someone who is not very fond of organized religion, and I don't just mean like Christianity or Judaism or whatever, all of the ones that were mentioned in this episode, any organized religion, any earth religion of man's creation, I have a distaste for. I don't at all subscribe to, but I don't particularly care for, even though I can recognize that there are certain moral positive elements that can be born out of them and taken from them and things like that. I have always found there to be more bad than good. And so I'm not a fan of religion. I'm not a fan of exploring religious aesthetics and storytelling and such like that. And so that aspect of this episode did rub me the wrong way a little bit. Not overarchingly so much as how it, sort of played into the familial history of Captain Pike. I did find that whole aspect of that mix of the sciences and religion that, he spoke about revolving around his father's occupation and passions and things of that nature. It did kind of rub me the wrong way a little bit, that revelation about Pike's character. But I do have to admit by the end that it did, I guess, sort of give a broader sense for him as to how to approach this, a more open-minded stance and perspective on all of this, where you had Michael Burnham, who is very cold and logical and doesn't necessarily, while she is aware of Earth's religions and things like that, she doesn't necessarily subscribe to any of them and doesn't find any, fortitude within them. And then, of course, the other crew member whose name I still haven't learned, but I have to say that's another point that I loved, thumbs up for this episode, is how much of the bridge crew are actually partaking in the story and how much more we're seeing of them. But she says, her family were not religious at all whatsoever, out of sight, out of mind. So there is, I do have to admit, a certain element of how that came into play with Pike's character that allowed him to better approach this scenario, maybe, arguably, than Burnham and the other crew person. But it still rubbed me the wrong way a little bit, because again, I just have that distaste with Earth-born religions and religion in general, all of them, for all of their faults, for all of the bad things that come out of them. But I do have to say, the thing that was most impressive to me, much akin to like the, fortune cookie fortune that we found in the first episode of season 2, that was in the Ready Room that Pike had stumbled across, and that sort of paid homage or hinted toward his eventual future, very much akin to that. In this episode, when their tech is stolen from them, from the Jacob character, there's the young girl who activates the phaser and it's going to explode effectively. And Pike immediately, without thinking, runs and jumps on it and almost sacrifices himself for the life of this child. And this is, again, a tipping of the hat, a precursor to what will inevitably and eventually lead to his being crippled. If you go back to the Menagerie from TOS, that just elegant, brilliant two-parter that took aspects of the original pilot, The Cage, and merged them into this two-parter with the modern Kirk, Spock, McCoy crew and everything like that. That's very much the same kind of heroics that Pike had displayed that led him to have been crippled and all burned on the side of his face and confined to a wheelchair. And so I love that aspect of his character coming across in this episode, even as bittersweet as it is, what his future beholds. I really loved the whole arc for the character of Jacob, even though the fact that he locked them in the basement of this church and stole all their tech and was trying to implore the rest of the humans in this settlement that, Earth is still out there and there were survivors and we're not alone and maybe we can go back and all this kind of stuff. It was really nonsensical to the behaviors and the methodologies that had been accepted for so long in this human colony. And but I really loved the payoff of his arc in the way Burnham kind of instigates this by having that conversation with Pike later on after everything's said and done, that he's needing an answer. If nobody else, we should go to him and we should at least confirm for him what he has been struggling with, what he's been believing for so long. And I love the fact that this is enough to sate him and satisfy him, and that Pike was willing to do that, and even give him a power cell to bring back the light for this colony and help them survive that much more. For, the exchange of the footage, the, soldier helmet with the footage, the cam footage, of whatever this angelic so-called or demonic being is that these red energy signatures point back to. Just that whole aspect. I liked the actor who played the character of Jacob. I liked his arc, and again how Pike played into that, how he decided to go with that in the end, per his counsel with Burnham. And I like the fact that Pike is arguably on equal footing with her as far as the focus goes, as far as the command goes. A lot of people have been clamoring since day one and complaining since day one that she's very much a Mary Sue. She's all too much in focus, and she knows how to do everything and anything, and she's always the savior of the day and everything like that. And I feel like with the addition of Pike, it's actually meted out that much more, because Pike is a commanding presence. The actor, Anson Mount, is such a, charismatic and leader-like, character in his portrayal, in his characterization, that I feel like it tempers Michael's standing out too much, as people might complain about. And I like the fact that, kind of akin to how Kirk might go to Spock or Kirk might go to McCoy, seeking counsel, trying to bring himself around to understanding the vast scope of a given dilemma. I like how that was going on between them in this episode, especially toward the end, as I say, discussing the Jacob character. And there are elements that fall in line with that as far as getting the bridge crew characters to become that much more involved and seeing more of them that I really, really appreciate watching this new season. I feel like, 2 episodes in, and it's better, it surpasses anything we saw and we got in season 1 of Star Trek Discovery, because it feels that much more Star Trek. And I love seeing the interactions of all of the bridge crew and seeing how integral they all are. And so this brings me sort of to my final point about this particular episode, which is going to probably be a shock and surprise For anyone who has watched any of my coverage of anything to do with Star Trek Discovery, first and foremost, but especially if you saw my episode 1 of Season 2 discussion video, I pointedly said, I hate Tilly. I can't stand her. It's not that I don't like the actress, I just don't like the way the character is characterized and portrayed. Very annoying, and just stands out to me as just a burdensome character. All of that being said, I actually loved her in this episode. I loved how integral she was. I loved everything, the way in which they utilized her, the way in which they characterized her. Her compassion for Stamets and wanting to find any other possible way to operate the spore drive, rather than having him tap into the mycelial network time and time again, especially now knowing that he's seen his lover, Dr. Culber, within it. And it seems like even per this latest jump, he may have experienced that again. Throughout the whole episode, we have something kind of similar going on with Tilly, though, that may or may not relate to a similar mycelial aesthetic. Because if you recall, I pointed this out in my episode 1 of Season 2 discussion video, we left off with her having a spore sort of entering her body, entering her brain or her mind or whatever it was. And that's something that comes very much into play in this episode. After she had been sort of trying to extract some dark matter elements out from this asteroid, and the explosion that throws her, across the room, she wakes up in sickbay and everything like that. Just the impact that had on her, and her seemingly ghostly visions and interactions with this former friend of hers, going back to her school days, who is long since deceased, and that very much being, something part and parcel with the same kind of things Stamets is going through, seeing this apparition or this spiritual soul-like essence of his lover, it was something very similar, probably cut from the same cloth because of that spore's impact on her. And I knew there was something up. I knew there was something up about her interactions with that character. I didn't know exactly what it was going to be until the last couple of times we saw her in the episode. Before the actual reveal, I was like, okay, this character is like a spirit, or could she be this angel or demon, whatever this red entity is, coming through and trying to have connectivity and manipulations toward Tilly or something like that. I knew it was something. I didn't know exactly what it was going to be. I don't think we have a definitive answer by the end. But that made everything Tilly was doing, how integral she was in figuring out how to save this human settlement by using the asteroid they had brought in, how integral she was in figuring that out, and even against, Saru's orders, coming to the bridge and being like, this is how we have to do this. This is how we're going to save these people. I think this was the most well-utilized she was in the entirety of the series thus far, at least for my own personal tastes. I know people love her. I know, she's a fan favorite and everything, as I have been scolded on my Facebook account and such like that. She's always been distasteful for me. I haven't liked her from day one. But she has had moments that I thought were relatively celebratory and things like that. And I've noted them, even in episode 1 of the season. I thought there were elements of her character that were very much well utilized in the story. Well, same goes with this episode, only it was the whole episode. Everything she did in this episode made her matter, made me care about her, made her resonate. Now, I'm not going to say from here on out that's going to be the case every other episode. I'm probably going to still find things that annoy me about her and that I can't stand and that have me face palming. But this is the first episode I can actually say from beginning to end, nothing she did was overly annoying or overly pedantic to the point where I just was like, get her off the screen. I really enjoyed this. Is the first time I really enjoyed her character, and I really enjoyed what she brought to the overarching plot of this episode. So that's 3 for 3. I was really impressed with Pike. I was really impressed with the Jacob character, how Pike and Burnham went back and forth, and I was really impressed with Tilly in this episode. And so that's really all I've got on this one. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of episode 2 of season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, New Eden. If you've seen it as well, love it or hate it, anything goes in the comments below. And otherwise, if you enjoyed this video and would like to consider supporting my channel, I'd like to ask you to have a look at my PayPal contribution link posted both in the description as well as the comments below. You can explore options very much akin to Patreon, where you can set up a monthly contribution, a one-time only kind of thing. You can send me a personal message alongside a contribution requesting topics I may discuss in the future, ask for shout-outs, make recommendations of things I might check out at a later time, and all that good stuff. And anything you saw fit to send my way would be 2 thumbs up for me and just secure my longevity on YouTube, and it would mean the world to me as a direct line directly to me. And so otherwise, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Live long and prosper.